Alrighty, folks. Now on to the main event. Let's talk about the main event here at UFC 242. Dustin Poirier versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, interim champion versus champion, to unify the belts. And I feel like a lot of analysts are saying that they think that Dustin has a chance to make this fight competitive. But I think a lot of people are saying that, but they don't really think that Dustin can win. They think that Dustin can make it competitive maybe, but they don't really think that Dustin can win. Now this is where I differ. I actually think that Dustin Poirier can beat Khabib this weekend. Now you might think I'm crazy, but let me just explain why I think Dustin can beat him. Khabib's only ever fought in 2 5-round fights in his whole career. And they're both his 2 most recent fights. So there's the Conor fight that he obviously finished Conor in the 4th round, and then there's the Iaquinta fight, which obviously went all 5 rounds. Now in both of those fights, Khabib didn't wrestle the whole time. You know, Khabib took off in the Conor fight. He took off the 3rd round from wrestling. You know, in the Iaquinta fight, he took off the 3rd and the 4th round and tried to wrestle a little bit in the 5th round, but he took off basically the 3rd and the 4th round from wrestling. And I think the reason why he did that is because a human being can't wrestle for 25 minutes straight. It's just not like physically possible with a human's cardio to wrestle for 25 minutes. You know, you'll literally exhaust yourself before you get there. For example, an Olympic wrestling match are 4 minutes and 6 minutes. 4 minutes for a freestyle, 2 2-minute periods, 6 minutes for Greco, 2 3-minute periods. NCAA wrestling is 7 minutes. It's a 3-round first round, 3-minute first round, then 2 minutes, then 2 minutes. It's a 7-minute match. You know why these matches are only 4, 6, 7 minutes, you know, at the Olympic and NCAA high level, is because it's not humanly possible to wrestle for an extended period of time. You know how long a boxing match is? It's 10 3-minute rounds, 12 3-minute rounds at the championship level, 30 minutes, 36 minutes. So it's possible to strike for that long. It's not really possible to grapple for that long. And I think Khabib knows that. I think Eddie Alvarez was the guy who famously said that you can only really wrestle for 15 minutes, you know, so that's 3 rounds in a 5-round fight. See, you have to be strategic about what minutes you use those wrestling. You use your wrestling, you know, you can use 5 minutes in the 1st round. You know, that's a good strategy because your opponent is going to be freshest in the 1st round. That's when they can, you know, land the hardest shots on you, and they're the most spry, right? So you can use up 5 minutes in the 1st round, and then, you know, you could maybe use up 3 or 4 minutes in the 2nd round. So let's say 4 minutes in the 2nd round. Now you've only got 6 minutes of wrestling left in your gas tank, and you've got 15 minutes to go. And if you look at Poirier, I mean, let's look back at the J.E.T fight. Obviously, J.E.T wasn't trying to wrestle Poirier, but I mean, he did put extreme pressure on him, and Poirier had to prove he did prove in that fight that he has immense cardio and his power carries late into fights. You know, he landed the knockout in the 4th round. So obviously his cardio, with the insane pace that J.E.T put on and the massive amount of damage that J.E.T put on with the leg kicks, Poirier still had the cardio and the strength in the 4th round to knock J.E.T out. So Poirier is dangerous late in a fight. If Poirier can make Khabib work, and so if Poirier can make Khabib work for the first 2 or 3 rounds of that fight, and at the end of those 2 or 3 rounds, if he still has a good amount of gas left in his tank, I love his chances to be able to finish Khabib in the 4th or the 5th round. Like, I love his chances, because if you look at what Iaquinta was able to do with Khabib when Khabib stood with him, Iaquinta was really squatted down low, with his hands really low, ready to extend forward, you know, and push his hips backward, you know, to defend the takedown. Like, he was always in a position where he was ready to defend the takedown, and because of that, he wasn't in the best position to throw his hands with maximum efficacy, right? And then even at that, he was able to land some shots on Khabib later on in that fight. And if you saw Khabib, when they were standing late in that fight, like Rogan and the commentators were even pointing this out, Khabib backs up with his chin straight in the air, man. Straight in the air. And so that means that he's extremely susceptible to 3, 4, 5 punch combinations, which is just not Iaquinta's strong suit. If Iaquinta could have put together a 4 punch combination, he could have landed a knockout shot on Khabib. I really think that. I went back and rewatched that fight. If you don't believe me, go back and rewatch that fight. The commentators are even pointing it out. Khabib backs up with his chin straight up in the air, and he's susceptible to getting hit by that 3rd, 4th, 5th shot if you can throw a long combination, which Dustin Poirier is phenomenal at. Dustin Poirier's striking is so criminally underrated right now. I mean, he just went out there and outstruck Max Holloway for 5 straight rounds. Max Holloway, the guy who's known for having some of the most elite striking and elite cardio in the entire UFC. And Poirier went out there and put it to him for 5 straight rounds, won 4 rounds to 1, and was still pouring on him, landing big shots, showing that his cardio and his power was still there in the 5th round. And Poirier likes to throw multiple punch combinations. He doesn't just throw 1 or 2 punches like Iaquinta does, which is generally Iaquinta's style. He doesn't throw 3, 4, 5 punches. Poirier does. He does. And Poirier at 5'9" has a 6-foot reach. You look at Poirier's back, it is as wide as a Canadian football field, man. This guy can sling punches from far out, And that was another issue that Iaquinta had, was that he had a hard time reaching Khabib because he was worried about overreaching and entering into a range where Khabib could duck and wrestle him, right? Poirier, if he can get out there early on in the fight and, he's going to get taken down by Khabib. Like, people talking about takedown defense, that's almost irrelevant. Like, your takedown defense doesn't really matter. Khabib's going to take you down, But when you're down, you can't stop working. Just because you're on the ground, you have to just be scrambling, moving. Because Khabib doesn't land the most devastating ground and pound. He worries about position before he really establishes his position. And that's where he gets, his Dagestani handcuff, where he reaches to your far side and controls one of your arms. So he's got the one arm controlled, and then he can just beat you freely while you can't even defend yourself because your arm is pinned back. I love calling it the Dagestani handcuff. He's phenomenal at that. But the point is that Khabib is more about position and then doing damage from there. He doesn't do extreme damage immediately. So if you're Dustin and you get taken down, which is going to happen, particularly early, it is definitely going to happen. You just have to be relentless with scrambling. You have to be relentless with making Khabib work. You have to just try to exhaust him. And then you have to hope that while you're doing all that scrambling and work from underneath, that your cardio is going to hold up in the later rounds. And if it does, if he can make Khabib work hard in those first few rounds, and Dustin's cardio holds up, which, I mean, the only way to make Khabib work is by working yourself. So his cardio holding up is an X factor. But if his cardio can hold up, which it has in his last couple of fights, against Gaethje and Holloway, like I said, I mean, he carries his power late into the fights like he did against Gaethje and Holloway. I like his chances to be able to land a knockout strike in the 4th or the 5th round. This isn't a hot take. This isn't me, trying to, be a contrarian and try to say, the 27-0 guy is going to lose. I really think that Poirier has a good chance at being able to beat Khabib. He just has to be able to weather that early storm. And he has to have the cardio to weather that early storm and still be able to put forth offense in the 4th and the 5th round, which is, this is much easier said than done, right? So just looking at Poirier's record since he's gone up to lightweight, he's had 11 fights. He's got 1 loss, the 1 no contest, and in his 9 wins, he's got 6 knockouts and TKOs, and basically the majority of his fights since he's gone up to lightweight have been against pretty high level guys. Khabib, meanwhile, has had 11 fights in the UFC, and he's obviously 11-0. He's got 3 subs and 2 KOs and TKOs, but the KOs and TKOs were earlier on. He hasn't finished. He hasn't gotten a good TKO or KO on a high level opponent yet. He does have good subs over high level opponents in Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor, so that is a possibility. But Khabib wins a lot by decision, is what I'm getting at, and we haven't seen him be able to. And so when he's in a 3-round fight, he can dominate with his wrestling and win by decision. But in a 5-round fight, I just don't know that he's got 25 minutes of wrestling in him, I think that he's going to have to stand with Dustin for a round or two, and that's going to be playing with fire, man, because Dustin has serious power. He throws great combinations, 3, 4, 5 punch combinations, and he's got a very solid reach for the division. So he's got a lot of things on his side in this one. Now, an X factor that I'm favoring Khabib for is when I look at fights, I'm a weird guy. Like, I look at these little X factors outside of the cage and I try to make sense of them. Now, one thing about Khabib compared to Dustin that makes me want to really favor Khabib in this one is that Khabib went out to Dubai like weeks and weeks and weeks ago. Like Will Harris of Anatomy of a Fighter has been doing great footage covering Khabib for the last several weeks since he's been in Dubai. And if you look at Dustin, I mean, we saw it on Embedded the other day. He just got over there. I mean, that's a big time difference. It's a big climate difference. Like that's got to be that's an X factor to me. The fact that Dustin didn't go out there and acclimatize to the weather over there, regulate his body in his circadian rhythm to the time over there. Just the fact that Khabib seemed to have really left no stone unturned. He didn't spare a single dollar in this camp. He's out in Dubai looks like he's got freaking 50 training partners out there with him. He's got his dad out there with him. He's got, like I said, Will Harris out there with him, Anatomy of a Fighter guy. He's left no stone unturned in preparation for this fight. And I just don't know if Dustin has gone all in and spent top dollar in the same kind of way that Khabib has. And that mentality of Khabib just being all in, like he hasn't left a stone unturned. He has spent every single dollar to prepare for this fight maximally. That means something to me. Like, I remember when Fabricio Verdum took on Cain Velasquez in Mexico City. I loved Verdum in that fight because Verdum went down to Mexico City well in advance. I forget how far in advance, but, a couple of months in advance. So he could acclimatize to the altitude in Mexico City, and he could get used to the feeling of being down there. And that made me love Verdum in that fight. And I remember I put down a pretty decent amount of coin on Verdum in that one. He was like a 3-1 underdog, and I won big. So, I think that's something worth noting. It's worth noting when a fighter seems to be all in on a training camp, like all in. They're investing every single bit of themselves, financially, mentally, physically, into being successful in this fight. And I'm not saying Dustin didn't spend a lot of money on this training camp, or isn't mentally or physically all in, but just the fact that Khabib did go out to Dubai so early, that says a little something to me. But nevertheless, man, I'm picking Dustin Poirier in this one, man. I can't believe it. I've been along with all of the MMA media the whole way saying that, Dustin's a live dog in this one. And I felt the same way. Yeah, Dustin's a live dog. But I also kind of always said that and kind of thought that. But I still just was like, but Khabib will still win, Like, Dustin's a live dog. He's going to make it an interesting fight. This is going to be a good scrap. But Khabib will still win. But, today when I was doing my research and I was rewatching some of their fights, particularly that Iaquinta fight and then the Justin Gaethje fight, And I know Gaethje didn't wrestle Poirier, so it wasn't the same kind of extreme pressure that Khabib's going to put on Poirier, but that was extreme pressure put on Poirier in that one by Gaethje, and Poirier withstood it all, and he never stopped landing big shots. He never stopped looking for big shots, and he carried his power and his cardio late into the fight. Now, another X factor in this one is that, we haven't seen Poirier against a really strong wrestler since he fought Danny Castillo 9 years ago. And obviously Castillo is nowhere near Khabib's level. So that's an interesting X factor, is that, Dustin really has fought mostly strikers. He hasn't fought a guy that's going to try to just like wrestle him as their primary directive, their primary route to victory. So it's going to be interesting to see how Dustin does against a high-level wrestler, because we don't know how good his bottom game and scramble game is going to be, because we just haven't seen him in those positions in the UFC against a guy even close to the level of Khabib. So although I'm picking Dustin in this one, I obviously would not be surprised if Khabib would win, but I like Dustin in this one as a dog. And if you're feeling half as confident as me, if I were you, I would put some cash on it.